You're listening to the Slavic Podcast, Episode 3. We just spoke with SUNY Oneonta President Emeritus Dr. Ellen Donovan, remembering a trip to Krasnoyarsk, Siberia in 2008. Now I am inviting my guest host, Ms. Amanda Katz. Many cats as opposed to just a few cats. Amanda is my student in a credit-bearing course called Podcast Production. And appropriately, I wanted her to get a taste of conducting an interview and also showing me the console, the brand new console that we got. So welcome to the program as our engineer. And by the way, the first segment of our show was also engineered by Amanda. So now you're going to do the guest hosting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Donovan, we talked about Krasnoyarsk before, so let's go to St. Petersburg now. Tell us about the founding of the city and its different names.
Well, St. Petersburg, to my way of thinking, was the height of our visit, no question about it. And it is, I believe, the cultural center of Russia. St. Petersburg was known as Petrograd from 1914 to 1924, and then Leningrad from 1924 to 1999. It is the second largest city in Russia. It's on the Neva River, which is at the head of the Gulf of Finland, a population of about 5.5 million residents. Russia experienced a renaissance of culture and sciences, so that when you look at St. Petersburg today and all the cultural monuments that they had, you begin to realize that she brought the Enlightenment and Renaissance of culture and sciences to St. Petersburg, and it wouldn't be the same without having her head there.
So now let's move on to the Hermitage. What was it used for?
Well, the Hermitage is actually a series of buildings. The part that we saw is actually the museum. They say that it's the largest museum gallery space in the world, and it was founded in 1764 when Catherine the Great acquired a collection of paintings from a particular supporter of the Russian cultural era. It celebrates the birthday of its creation on December 7th each year, St. Catherine's Day, and the latest notion of how much visitors have been there, in 2021 there were over 1.6 million visitors coming to the Hermitage.
Can you tell us about some of the artworks collected?
Yeah, the artworks are really quite amazing. It has to be remembered that the Hermitage is actually more than one building. You can talk about the museum, and that's important. But at one point in time, there were, and still are, 6 buildings, and sometimes as many as 2,000 people residing in that area, especially the Tsars. They was kind of the home for the Tsars. So it served as a home and a workplace for all these people, in particular the imperial family. And they also was a place for masquerades, grand receptions, ceremony for government and state officials. The collection in the Hermitage is quite interesting. I can't give you the total number of works of art that they have. It's enormous.
Okay, so on to Catherine's Palace. What was the location and purpose of Catherine's Palace?
Well, the purpose of the palace was to be the summer residence of the Russian Tsars. And it is now, of course, part of a World Heritage Site. I think the site of Catherine's Palace is maybe about 15 miles outside of St. Petersburg. And it is totally magnificent. There is, surrounding the palace, a 1,400-acre park, which features multiple fountains and bridges. When you go to Catherine's Palace and take a tour, the first thing that happens that you notice is they put these cloth boots, and you put them over your shoes, so you won't damage the floors, which are specially wooden made and can be worn down a lot. The main part of the palace, in a kind of historical sense, was what's called the Amber Room. And the Amber Room was a room where many of the decorations were made out of amber. And amber happens to be a semi-precious material, which is found in great quantities around St. Petersburg. During World War II, the Russians approached St. Petersburg, just like they approached Moscow, but they never captured it. However, since Catherine's Palace was outside of St. Petersburg, the Russians did capture that, and in fact, they stole the whole Amber Room, and nobody really seems to know where it went. Eventually, the Russians started to replace and renovate the Amber Room, starting in 1982, and they completed it in 2003, and it cost $12 million to complete, $12 million. I don't know what that would translate in Russian money. So it has been restored back to its original glory.
You took a tour of Catherine's Palace?
We did. We took a tour of Catherine's Palace. I'll tell you an interesting story. We got on the bus, and we discovered that if you were Russian, you'd pay half as much to get into Catherine's Palace. So there we were. I was kind of huddling in the back of the bus with my wife, Annie, because the only words we knew in Russian was "niet," and I'm not even sure we said that correctly. Fortunately, Dr. Torosyan did speak Russian, but they said that she didn't speak Russian as a Russian would, which is maybe not true. So anyway, we had to cough up an extra amount for the tickets itself, and that was the start of the visit.
What is so special about the park surrounding Catherine's Palace?
Well, I think it's magnificent in the gardens they have, and as I said, it's 1,400 acres, so it's huge. You don't see all of it everywhere. There's statues, there are little grottos, there are decorations on the sides of the building. It really is a work of art in itself, beside what's going on inside the palace.
So in St. Petersburg, why visit an artist cemetery?
Well, the artist cemetery is special, I think. It's called the Tikhvin Cemetery. I think that's the right pronunciation. And there are 1,325 monuments there. So this is an artist cemetery where they have people I'm sure that we may have heard of. For example, they have Tchaikovsky, they have Mussorgsky, they have Borodin, many of the famous conductors. And so it's famous for that. And I couldn't name all the people because they have 1,300 there. When we were there, we had stopped at the monument to Tchaikovsky, which was a favorite. He was a favorite composer of my wife. And she was standing there, and she noticed that there were some flowers next to the fence around the monument itself. And so she picked a flower and leaned over and put it on the gravestone of Tchaikovsky. And there were people who were watching who applauded. So it's kind of like a magic moment. The other thing that was interesting about the cemetery is we saw a number of times these rather strange figures of grinning skull and crossbones, skeleton face grinning and the crossbones underneath. Have no idea what that was all about, but I guess they figured somebody was laughing somewhere. And the cemetery is so old, going back to the 1800s, that a lot of the pathways and the tombstones had been disturbed by tree roots. So they were left in that condition. But it was kind of a magic day for me.
Who is buried in the cemetery?
Well, Dostoevsky, Tchaikovsky, Borodin, Mussorgsky, a whole bunch of other people that people familiar with music and Russian music and art in particular would recognize.
What were your impressions of St. Isaac's Cathedral?
Well, our leader of the tour, Dr. Torosyan, wanted to go to the cathedral to get an icon, I believe, a picture of an icon. Now, icons, if I understand correctly, are painted pictures of saints. Icons now are replicated on small pieces of paper and cardboard. But the original icons are very, very valuable. So she wanted to have a particular, I don't know what the name of the icon was. She can tell us later, but it was a particular saint. The interesting thing about it was that it was a massive building as a cathedral, and some of the worshipers would come in. They didn't have, as I recall, pews, and if you wanted to go to confession, you were out in the open with whoever was hearing your confession around a table or something like that. And I remember some of the older Russian women who were kneeling on the hard pavement and knelt there for quite a while. I don't think I could do that. And just mention Jordanville so people have a sense of Russia right in our backyard.
Jordanville, New York, features a large monastery, a Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox monastery that has scholars from all over the Slavic world, including Bulgaria and Russia. And we've been there with some guests from Eastern Europe, and I've taken my guests over there. It's a pretty depressing place if you don't like sunlight and if you want to be in a ritual that's 3 hours long. Men and women are standing on separate sides, but otherwise it is beautiful. And the people who are there, they're very hospitable. They're immensely knowledgeable and engaged with faith. And all visitors are invited to share a meal after their service, the Sunday service. They don't call it a mass. There's another name for it. But after that ceremony, you can go and have fish or whatever is appropriate for that time of year. A very traditionally made Russian food. Jordanville is not too far from here.
And I must add that they have a magnificent but very small museum with some very, very valuable Russian artifacts. In Russia, the reign of Stalin was not good for churches because he didn't manage to eliminate churches, but he certainly turned many of them into community centers and was not very supportive of the church itself. So the people at Jordanville were probably exiles from Russia and considered themselves the free North American Orthodox Church, and built the church in about 1956. Oddly enough, the church burnt down in the first year it was open, and they had to rebuild it again.
Thank you.
Did you get to see the Church of Spilled Blood?
We did, and that was important because, first of all, it was much smaller than St. Isaac's, as I recall, and the spilled blood refers to the assassination, political nihilist assassinated Emperor Alexander II in 1881. And I guess they assassinated and killed him in the church itself, hence the word spilled blood.
In Russian, it's called Spas na Kravi. It's one of the most beautiful, colorful domes on a church. They usually have multiple domes, but this one is absolutely stunning with its color. and I think we saw it.
Your visit to St. Petersburg was obviously very positive.
It was really wonderful, and we did go to a wonderful restaurant, but I can't. Was it Georgian? A restaurant?
It was Georgian. It was called no, not Barashka. It was a Georgian restaurant where we ate khachapuri, cheese bread, cheese boats, and cheese pizza-like bread, which is now it's quite popular in New York City, and you can find places like Jama Mama and others where you can have excellent Georgian food. But what we had there was the closest to real Georgian food. And we all wore these big hats, sheep fur, and drank a lot of Georgian wine.
Yeah, that was a wonderful night. And it may have been the last night we spent in St. Petersburg. I can't remember for sure.
Probably. We really wanted to go back to that restaurant.
And the thing to remember about St. Petersburg, of course, is it's on a river, so it's bounded by water on the north side, as I recall. And it's not that far from Finland. It's pretty close to Finland.
Neva is the river, and it's very well known because poets like Pushkin talk about St. Petersburg as the city on Neva in poetic language. And speaking of Finland, it's so close you can probably take a ferry there. It's really,
the Bay of Finland, yes.
Bay of Finland. It's pretty close.
And it would be the Russian version of Paris, I think.
Yes. For the population of Finland coming back to Russia was a trip to exchange their denim jackets with some vodka because there was a shortage of vodka in Finland, or maybe it was more expensive. But if they came to Russia, they could just sell their clothes and buy as many bottles of vodka as they could carry back.
And there's also a lot of vodka in Russia.
There is, and good vodka too.
Yes.
Would you go back to St. Petersburg?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think without a doubt. Moscow is the government center of Russia, and maybe other things that go with that. And I'm sure they have their specialties in museums, the Kremlin a little bit, the Bolshoi Ballet. But I don't think they have the kind of cachet that the Hermitage presents in St. Petersburg.
How far is Moscow from St. Petersburg?
I think it's a little over 400 miles.
How did you get there?
We didn't walk. I think we flew from St. Petersburg to Moscow. I don't recall taking a bus or anything like that. There was, back in the day, before all the rapid transportation, there was a lot of exchange back and forth. That must have been quite a trip in the wintertime. Any doubt about that.
The Moscow metro system, is it as remarkable as they say?
Yeah, it really is. We were astonished at this system, which is only about 7 miles long and has 13 stations. But I believe it was under Stalin that these stations individually were made into kind of museums. So you went down there and you saw all this wonderful design, archways, and different kinds of architecture and statues and so forth. And so it was beautiful, quite interestingly enough.
So interesting that Annie Donovan wanted to take a photograph while going up on an escalator. And as soon as we reached the top of it, a policeman was standing there, and he said, "You have to delete the pictures."
Actually, he wanted to confiscate the camera.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Well, I think we were saved because you pointed out to him that he was on camera.
Yeah, I said there are cameras watching us, so you can't do anything illegal.
So she deleted a couple shots, but she had more than that, and we still have a picture. And the escalators going down.
In some of those places, there are underground waters and other obstacles to building those metro stations. And there is a lot of marble and granite used for those. There are statues in every station. There is a specific color and statues are of on a specific theme, and in one of them, people are saying the urban legend is that all humans are bending down; they're almost on their knees, and that sort of represents the Stalinist mentality. But it's a beautiful place and also doubles as a bomb shelter, obviously. And that's why as an object, as a place of civil defense, it probably remains protected from photography, from the invasions.
Well, it's kind of like a tourist landmark, and I had one interesting experience. As I was descending down into one of the stations, I noticed on the sidewalls there were a lot of advertisements. And then a gentleman who was obviously Russian himself came up behind me, walked down behind me, and he tapped me on the shoulder. He must have known I was American for sure. And he looked at these posters and he said Stalin would never have allowed that. Meaning, I guess, that maybe Stalin wanted it to be artistic rather than...
The Red Square, how did it feel to be there? Are there nice spots overlooking the square to stop for coffee and tea and reflect on the history of the space?
Well, many of us have seen the Red Square for the parades on May Day. And the gallery standing on top of Lenin's tomb, where if you were there one year and not the next year, bad things may have happened to you. At the end of Red Square is, of course, St. Basil's Cathedral. And somebody had talked about demolishing the cathedral so they could have better parades. But the fact is that Stalin said, no, can't cancel that idea. So the Red Square really is a showcase for military parades from 1919 onward. And then, of course, the mausoleum for Lenin was there beginning about 1924. That was interesting because the mausoleum is underground. You go down into the mausoleum. It's quite dark. It's very quiet. You pass by guards who are carrying Kalashnikovs, rifles or machine guns. And you walk past Lenin, who, as I recall, was up kind of on a podium. How they managed to keep Lenin since 1924 is a good question of embalming, but there it is. And they kind of hustle you through that. I believe Stalin's grave has been moved so it's not as prominent as it was as they get into historic revisionism. Lenin is still, I think, the favorite among all people talking about Russia today.
So you did get a chance to visit Lenin's tomb?
Yes, we did. Yeah. It was amazing and kind of weird and scary in its own way. But something not to miss as you're there on Red Square. And it's probably symbolic that in the May Day celebrations, everybody is standing on top of the mausoleum, and it's on top of the building of the mausoleum, reminding Russians of the importance of Lenin and the revolution.
This is Gayane Torosyan. I grew up in the Soviet Union and visited Russia, Moscow a few times, but I never saw the mausoleum. You know why? Because of the enormous lines that you had to wait for hours, if not days, to get in, and my family never had the patience. But with you, we went.
Well, I don't know whether we had a special guide or not, but we didn't have to wait in line very much.
Well, this was after Perestroika, I remember.
So not as many people would be there?
Not as many.
Yes. Perestroika means, of course?
It's reconstruction. It was what Gorbachev did to the Soviet Union. He dismantled it. And before dismantling the Union, he started rebuilding the country and introducing elements of capitalism. So perestroika has become an international word, just like Sputnik, which is mispronounced as Sputnik, but it's Sputnik. Sputnik means companion, the aircraft.
And of course, the pyramid there, the step pyramid, the tomb of Cyrus the Great is what they copied this from. So it was something else, kind of like a temple that you might find in Egypt, as a matter of fact, only nowhere near as big.
The Kremlin itself, what was it like?
Well, the Kremlin means kind of like a Russian citadel. And it's a walled entity that, as I recall, lies in back of Lenin's tomb. I'm not sure how many acres it has, but it has a number of buildings, 5 palaces, 4 cathedrals, and the Kremlin towers.
So, in closing, can you tell us more about Russia, its history and culture?
Well, these are just some facts that struck me about Russia. They're not complete by any means, but it may explain both what Russia was and what Russia is right now. Remembering that the Soviet Union and Russia today has 11 time zones, which is huge. It goes all the way across the continent there, thousands and thousands of miles. And in the old Soviet Union, it was comprised of 15 socialist republics, including, for example, Armenia and all sorts of other lands that are now Chechnya and places like that. The other fact that I think is part of Russian history that we have to think about a little bit is that the Soviet Union suffered the highest number of fatalities of any single nation during World War II. And the number of fatalities, the estimates range from 22 to 27 million deaths.
Can you continue on like how you see the future of Russia from here on, including like U.S. to Russia relations?
It's too bad we couldn't continue as we were in 2008. I don't see that changing. Russia has alienated itself from the Western world for sure. We don't know about its relations with China, of course. It has strengthened the European Union and NATO nations. No one can say for sure what's going to happen with the Ukraine, but it's clear that if we don't take the position that the United States has taken along with its allies in Europe, that Putin will not stop his aggression, and who knows where he'll go next. Poland, other parts of Europe, and the Scandinavian countries. So we have to assume that he has to be defeated there or reach some sort of a standoff. Thank you so much for joining this podcast. It's been very fascinating. It's given me a chance to look back and have some fond memories of travels with colleagues and understanding a culture other than ours and how warm it was back in the spring of 2008.
Thank you, Dr. Donovan, and thank you, Professor Torosyan, for having me on and letting me ask questions. This was an amazing experience. This is an amazing podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Amanda.
it.
You've been listening to episode 3 of the Slavic Podcast. I'm Gayane Torosyan. Today my guest host was Amanda Katz, a student at SUNY Oneonta, studying podcast production in this particular case, but Amanda also took other classes with me and other faculty, and too bad you weren't here, Dr. Donovan. We had our guest, President Emeritus Donovan of SUNY Oneonta, remembering our trip to Krasnoyarsk, Siberia, and the culture and the country of Russia. Thank you for listening. Join us again next time on our Slavic Podcast.
Thank you.